In this video, we're going to cover a few ideas for how to treat the mixbus, also known as the 2-bus, stereo mix, master bus, the old bottleneck. You get the point. Now for the uninitiated, the master bus is the main left-right stereo output bus in your digital audio workstation. Different hosts might have different looking master buses, but they function in the same way. It's the master pipe into which all the individual tracks pool, and it's also where a lot of folks decide to add a few tools and toys to shape the sound of the mix on a global bird's eye level. Now, some folks might choose to leave their master bus empty, some choose to do a little bit of processing from it, and others throw the kitchen sink at it. This video will assume that you're going to be doing at least some processing on the master bus and provide some helpful suggestions for how to get started. Now today I'm going to be using a track called Color in Me by a band called Death and the Penguin. Before I make any moves on the master bus, it's important to think about why you're doing any processing at all in the first place. Do you want to make things wider? Do you want to thicken an element on the stereo level that you can't otherwise on a track level? Are you looking to brighten things up or darken them a little? Having a rough idea of why you want to perform moves on the master bus can help direct your focus and lead you to choose tools that help you accomplish your goals. Personally, my goal with this track is to glue the elements together a little, congeal the mix. I'd like to make the snare punch a little harder and brighten up the track to highlight Toby's vocal. Generally, I want to uncover this mix a little. What I don't want to do is add more level or gain necessarily. I'll leave that up to the mastering engineer. So with those goals in mind, let's get started. The first move I'll make is to instantiate Ozone 8 on my master bus. There it is right there. I'm going to harness some of the power of Master Assistant to help get me started with my master bus processing. Before I begin, I'll make sure that I'm looping a portion of the song that features a lot of energy. This could be a chorus or a section of the track where we can hear everybody playing at the same time. Once I have my loop set, I'll run Master Assistant in streaming mode. Ozone will now listen to my track and tailor some processing to help me get started. Ozone by default will enable the equalizer, dynamics, a dynamic EQ, and finally the maximizer. But all I need is the dynamic EQ for mixbus processing. So I'm going to press accept and remove the other modules. Here's the reason I'm doing this. During its pass, Master Assistant was listening for any timbral anomalies like resonant peaks and rumble across the entire frequency spectrum. It placed these nodes here, which will now delicately and transparently push down and suppress regions in the frequency spectrum should they get too out of control. The strategy behind placing the dynamic EQ first in my master bus chain is that I can make sure that I get as even and consistent as possible an EQ curve before adding other effects and tools which could bring up the loudness of this track and call attention to timbral problems. In other words, if we didn't ensure a balanced and smooth EQ curve at the outset, we might be highlighting resonances or volatile frequencies when we add compression or saturation down the line. So adding a dynamic EQ now will make sure that we're setting ourselves up for success nice and early. Next, I'm going to call up the dynamics module here, which is our multiband compressor. I'd like to frame the overall mix and introduce some energy across the frequency spectrum, and I'll do this by dividing the spectrum into 3 respective areas, low, mid, and high. To get some assistance and discover where the energy is focused overall, I'm going to use the learn function to automatically place the bands over the spectrum. First, I'll remove one band, as 3 is pretty much all I need for this song. Now I'll play some audio and press learn. So now that my bands have automatically settled over the spectrum, I'm going to use the band link function. By engaging the band link, I'll ensure that adjustments made to any band control will affect the corresponding control in all other bands. You don't always have to mirror controls across each band, but I find that this technique leads to a more transparent, smooth compression across the overall body of music. Now that my bands are linked, any move that I make on one band will be mirrored and reflected in the others. So let's just get started with the multiband compression process. The first thing I'm going to do is bring the threshold down to a point where I'm only getting a few dBs of gain reduction. I'll bring my ratio to 4:1. I'm going to relax the attack a little bit. And I'll relax the release too. Now the moves that I made in the top band are reflected in the mid and low band. Now the next thing I'll do is make sure that I have auto makeup gain engaged to make up for any gain that I lost when I began compression across each band. Just press that button there. And I should note that you can blend the amount of compressed signal with the unprocessed signal to taste here if the effects of the compression are too pronounced. You can slide the parallel toggle from left to right. I think I'll bring things down by around 30% or so. Leave it there at 70. And I'm also going to bring this band down because I want a little bit more of the low mids included. Let's do a before and after, and to hear only the effect of the compressor and not the dynamic EQ, I can press the solo button up here, which bypasses all processing in other modules. The last change I made here was just to introduce a little bit of gain in every band, but very subtle, 0.8 dBs. Because I made that change in the top high-end band here, it's reflected across all the other ones too, just to help the effects of the multiband compression, the congealing here, really pop out of the speakers. So with that in mind, let's do some before and afters with the bypass button. Kaleidoscopes in the sun, scattered wave of light floods, redraws the lines and lights the shades. Only a fool would grieve, only a fool. Kaleidoscopes in the sun, scattered wave of light floods, redraws the lines and lights the shades. So now, after multiband compression using band link going parallel a little bit, we've managed to bring all the elements of this mix a little bit closer up against the glass. The bass is moving, the low end elements are moving, things are popping in a way that has introduced, I think, a healthy amount of energy where we didn't have that before. So, with all that stuff in mind, we could continue tweaking, but I want to move on to saturation to really add color and excitement to this mix bus. While most folks tend to reach for an EQ to brighten up or beef up their mix bus, careful amounts of targeted saturation can deliver some pretty stunning results too. I'm going to use the exciter module to do just that. I'm going to call it up over here, and there it is. The first thing I'm going to do is engage oversample mode by pressing this button here. This mode utilizes more processing power to increase the quality level of the exciter module by increasing the sampling rate of the applied distortion to reduce aliasing. Long story short, if you like what you hear when you engage it, leave it, but be aware that it's going to use more CPU power than when you had it turned off. The next thing I'll do is choose the position of my crossover points. And what I want to do is make sure that this low band is catching the very bottom of that snare when I go to saturate it. So to do that carefully, I'm going to engage the solo button here and have a listen and change this position until I can really hear the bottom of that snare hitting. Pretty happy with that. I'd like the low end to have a little more dirt than it did before, so I'm going to use the tape algorithm, leave the mix at 100%, and bring the amount to around 4.3. Let's have a listen as I do that. Kaleidoscopes in the sun, scattered wave of light floods. I'm going to leave the second band alone here because I really liked the low mids where the compressor left them. I'll add some excitation to the harmonics, however, between 2K and around 10K over here, again by going to the tape algorithm, choosing that. And I'm doing this because I want to highlight Toby's vocals. If I press the solo button here, we can hear just what's in that band, and this is a good way to check and make sure that you're saturating and exciting only the things that you want to saturate and excite. So in this case, the solo feature was super helpful because I'm getting more of Toby's lower register by lowering the band and catching the lower frequencies in his voice. So now it's time to add a bit of saturation there. Finally, I want to add a little spark to the top end. I'll go to this upper band from 10K and above, go to tape, and start making moves there. However, it's really important that when you're adding high end and excitation like this, that you take care of any sibilance at a mix level. So if you've got sour cymbals or SE vocalists, all that stuff can potentially be highlighted when you add color to this region of the frequency spectrum. So be very careful to control for that prior to any master bus work, especially with a harmonic saturation tool like this. Whenever you're experimenting with harmonic saturation, it's always a good idea to push things too far so that you know when to pull back. For example, if I push this up, you can tell we get kind of crunchy, especially if I solo the band. So let's peel back a little bit. And you can see that if I bring it all the way down, kind of feels like something's missing. So let's bring it back up conservatively. Let's do a before and after of all of our processing, keeping in mind the goals that we had before we started. We wanted to make the snare knock a little harder and to uncover and brighten up the mix as a whole. Let's do another bypass round, but we'll engage the gain match feature. And this is going to ensure that all we hear when we go from before to after is the effect of the modules that I placed here, and not the gain jumping up and down. So even with gain match enabled, the before and after is still providing a discernible difference between processed and unprocessed. And the after reflects the results that I went into this mix bus process with to make the snare a bit snappier and to uncover and brighten up the whole mix. Now, as a final gut check, I can use our Tonal Balance Control plugin, which is over here on my master bus after Ozone 8, to make sure that I'm delivering a healthy, great sounding tonally balanced mix to the mastering engineer, or before I start adding more level on my own to make this track more competitive. Let's play a little bit of audio. As we can see from the distribution of energy using the modern target, we're very well balanced, meaning that this track stands a great chance at providing a consistent, enjoyable listener experience, whether it's being played back in a car, a club, or laptop speakers. And best of all, we have great low-end hygiene as indicated by the crest factor meter, This ball means that we aren't too squashed or too dynamic on our low end from 0 to 250 Hz, meaning we have a very tight, smooth, controlled overall low end. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, here's a few more that you might find helpful.